this week's Parsha Shir for Congregation KINS. Tonight's Parsha is Parashat Miketz, and it is dedicated to our hopes and prayers and tefillot for the refuah shlema of Rabbi Reuven Gross, so that hopefully he will recover and that he will be able to continue to inspire us for many, many years. Abravanel reminds us that this particular parsha, of course, follows very closely to the saga of Yosef and his being sold to Mitzrayim and ultimately being placed in unjustly in a pit in Potiphar's authority. Now, the Abravanel says to us that this week's parsha is magnificent for many reasons, but one of them is that we find that it is the antithesis of the problems that Yosef experienced in last week's parsha. Last week's parsha, we saw that he was hated by his brothers, and in this week's parsha, we see that he becomes beloved in Mitzrayim. In last week's parsha, his coat was stripped from him, and here he is given new royal robes. In last week's parsha, he, of course, was met with his fate due to the wife of Eshet Potiphar, and in this week's parsha, he marries. So many different elements came to light. Last week's parsha, he was thrown into a pit, and here he is taken out of the pit. Last week's parsha, because of dreams, he was thrown into the pit. This week's parsha, because of dreams, triumphs and becomes a major figure in Mitzrayim. And so the Abravanel says that we can see this, that the same HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who governs us even in times of difficulty and pain, is also capable and does, to those who deserve, does redeem them and bring them out almost through the reverse method of how they got in. We're picking up our story with Paro having his dreams, which no one can interpret to his satisfaction. Then, again, in yet another irony of the relationship between Parsha Vayeshev and Parsha Miketz, in last week's parsha, the Sarah Mashkim, who was supposed to remember him, forgot him, and the Torah goes out of its way to say Vayishkacheyu. He actually actively forgot him. In this week's parsha, the very beginning, when it is in to the advantage of the Sarah Mashkim, he remembers him. And so Yosef now is brought out of. Of course, the question is, what kind of a tzaddik was Yosef at this time in his life? Well, we only have one recording of his mentioning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is a very powerful and important one, when he refuses her advances toward him in last week's parsha. Very important. And he says, how can I do it? I'm trusted, and it's a betrayal of my master. And then in the end, he concludes his rationale by saying, "V'chatati le'elokim," that in the end, even if no one would find us, no one would see us, God knows that I've done wrong. Therefore, that sin which is so grievous, I will not do. Afilu to B'nai Noach, Chazal tell us they were osir, they were prohibited in cohabiting with an adulterous relationship. So Yosef then, of course, that's number one. Of course, that for a young boy to refuse those advances in itself shows a tremendous character. But this week it shows even more. He's taken from the pit that he's been in for 2 years. And it is a horrific situation. jail then is not like here where you have the television time and you have recess time and you can exercise time. No, that guaranteed wasn't that. You languished in jail for 1 year, 2 years. In this case, Yosef languished for 2 years. All of a sudden, they take him. Because the Sarah Mashkin, for his own personal reasons, determines that he wants to remind the king of Yosef's dreams. So, of Yosef's interpretation of dreams, he is brought immediately out of the pit, shaven and clothed, brought to Paro. And Paro says to him, I understand you can interpret dreams. I got to be honest. If I were in that situation, I definitely believe I would have said, you found your man. But that was not Yosef. Yosef's first word out of jail was, Eladai. It is not I. Elokim ya'aneh shlom Paro. God will answer and deal with the welfare of Paro. A remarkable statement. One, he's talking to a person who either believed it himself that he was a god or had dedicated his life to convincing others that he was a god. And yet Yosef, in front of Paro and in front of people who were there, said, Biladai, it is not I, interprets me. And implication, of course, then is, neither is it you, nor the people who serve you. Hashem will determine the welfare of Paro. And then, of course, he interprets the dreams. Paro sees that is a correct interpretation in his view. And then Yosef becomes Tzofnat Paneach. He has the title interpreter of the mysteries. And then he is now put in charge of the economic welfare and preparation for Mitzrayim. Now, then, of course, the 7 years of Sova are there, of 7 years of plenty. And now we're into the 7 years and into the 2 years into the years of deprivation, famine. And the brothers are sent to Mitzrayim. Yosef at this time is years older, a couple of decades older, and he sees his brothers. And the Torah tells us, Vayiskor et Chalomota. Yosef remembered the dream. He saw them, didn't remember, quote, what they did to him. He didn't reenact the terrible thing that they did to him years before. Rather, Vayiskor Yosef et Chalomota. He remembered the dreams. He remembered the destiny. He remembered the promise. And that's what motivated throughout all of these years. Now, of course, he sets up a situation where he calls them spies, raglimatem. They deny it, of course, and the brothers are awestruck. What? How in the world would this person decide that they are spies? A, they're not. But B, why would he pick on them? Because he maybe knows they're from Canaan. But what else could it be? And so Yosef then, in his elaborate plot, says, I'll tell you what, you claim that you're not spies. I think you are spies. So here's what you do. You told us that you told me that you had a brother back in Canaan. Go get him. Get your brother and bring him here. And of course, if you do bring him here, then this will vindicate your argument. But just to keep you honest, I'm going to take one of your brothers, hold him. When you bring back the young child, at this point he's not a young child, when you bring back the youngest brother safely, so I will see that you're telling the truth. Your words will be verified, and things will go well. Then he probably goes back into his quarters in the palace, wherever he was. You can imagine what the brothers are thinking. You can imagine the bewilderment that they're feeling. They go there like thousands of people to get grain because Yosef was provided for the grain through for meticulous preparation. They thought that they'll be like anybody else, whatever the requirements are. For others, will be a requirement for them, though they'll do it. And all of a sudden, they find out that they're being called criminals, and they see no justification. And they think to themselves, this is weird. Why is this happening? How could it be that this person just randomly picks us? Random is the word. B'mikre. He's just randomly picking us and putting us through a very rigorous process. And then, after Yosef said to them, why don't you bring your brother? I'll hold one, make sure you come back, get your brother, and everything will be okay. And not only that, here's food for your family. Your families will be fed. No interest in hurting them. I just don't want spies. Now the brothers are, why is this happening? And they utter three powerful words. Yosef is not there. They're trying to figure out how this could be. And they say, Vayomru ish el achiv, Perek mem bet, pasuk kaf aleph. Aval. Aval usually means a transition from a prior thought to a new thought, but it's a contrasting conjunction. Rashi, though, says actually he quotes Onkelos, that aval here means bikushta, certainly, truly, ashemim anachnu. We are guilty, al achinu, over our treatment of our brother. When we saw ra'inu tzarat nafsho, when we saw his agony, hitchanano eleinu, when he pleaded with us, below shamanu, and we did not respond at all. We heard it, we just didn't respond. Okay, by leinu, therefore, there has come to us hatzara zot, this difficult. Now, we have these three words, aval ashemim anach. That's what we're going to focus on now for the next few minutes. Aval ashemim. Now, the word ashemim, or the word ashem in general, like a korban asham, etc., really means an emptiness. Shmama, example, haaretz shmama, shin mem. That root, an aleph in front of it, of course, gives it direction. But there's an emptiness. We say, in other words, our arguments, our rationale, our reasoning is empty, has been empty. Aval ashemim anachnu. We have no full defense for what we've done. That means we're guilty, right? Aval ashemim anachnu. Now, the issue is with the word aval. What is aval doing? Now, Onkelos says, in this case, it's not a transition conjunction, which is a contrast between what we thought and what we now know, although it could be. Rashi brings it, but the word "but" here can be seen in its normal context. But we are guilty. In other words, our arguments are empty regarding our brother. Now, the Bravanel, who lived in the 15th century, the 1400s, in Spain. He was born in, Bravanel was born in Portugal, to a very prominent family, court family in Portugal. He grew up there, got an extraordinary education in Portugal. He learned oceanography, he learned astronomy, he learned philosophy, and of course, he was a very gifted person in terms of his own mind, his own abilities. But in 1485, when Bravanel was a relatively young man, there was an inquisition which took place in Portugal, and Bravanel and his family fled to the east, over the eastern border between Portugal and Spain, and he ran into Spain itself. There he was greeted with really open arms by Ferdinand and Isabella, two people who certainly are not heroes in Jewish history, in 1485. And there he spent 7 years building up the economy of Spain, because Hashem blessed him with an extraordinary mind, a disciplined mind, and a financial mind. So he was the, so to speak, the chancellor of the exchequer. He was the treasurer in Spain, and Spain prospered to the degree that they could afford to fund the Columbus expedition, etc. As a matter of fact, historically speaking, it's important to mention this now. Historically speaking, when the Jews were boarding the boats upon their expulsion from Spain on Tisha B'Av of 1492, they could see the boats, the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, the boats of Christopher Columbus, getting ready for their journey to what eventually became called the New World. Thought they were going to India, but they ended up in what we now call North America. Now, Abravanel tells us, gives us beautiful psychological insight into the minds of the brothers. And he says as follows. He says there are three ways for us to explain this aval, the but. But means a transition. Actually, there's four, which is unkelis. But Abravanel sort of dismisses that for his purposes. And he says there are three ways to look at it. One is they're saying to themselves now, they're doing a bit of deep introspection. And they're saying, crazy or not, this man cares about us. He cares about our families, and he has never met them. He said, go get provisions for your families, bring back your brother, and all will be well. There's no need for him to do that. He certainly could have sent them back without any provisions at all, according to Abravanel. Certainly they could. So that's not the normal way people do things. If I don't know you, I don't favor you. I do what I want to do. Especially a person in such power, the number two man in all of the world, at least the known world at that time. And they said, look how this person who knows none of us treats our family. How did we treat our brother? Aval Hashem anachnu. He's not guilty. He genuinely feels something wrong. But he's willing to feed our families, take care of us. We, on the other hand, how did we treat our brother? But Sarat Nafsho, not only did he have agony, we caused the agony. You can listen to his cry. Now, parenthetically, when I can't talk about it now, but Bravanel talks about it, and others, and Hamalivitz mentions, has a piece on it as to why and when things are not mentioned at the time of their occurrence in, quote, real time, and they're oftentimes brought up afterwards. The Ramban mentions it and others, but it appears that the brothers did hear him scream. just Torah does not interrupt the story. Tell us about his dreams. Only now. So therefore they say that these three words refer to the contrast between Yosef and how he treats strangers, and how they treated their own brother. Okay, and then he says the second issue that they were thinking about, rethinking, reframing the situation. They said, until now, we just believe this whole thing is serendipity, so to speak. It happened to pick on us. There's no rhyme nor reason as to why he would pick on us. We're certainly no different than anybody else. So why would he? Then, now while Yosef is in his quarters, they think and they say, wait a minute. Wow, Hashemim. Truth is, until now, we just thought that it's all in the past. Not so much to think about anymore. Yosef, the soul is gone. We get on with our lives. Everybody gets on with their lives except Yaakov. And Yaakov, every day of his life, he lived the trauma of the loss of his son. He refused. It's not that he couldn't be. He refused it. He did not want to be comforted. He lost his son. He did not want to be comforted. So, but everybody else, they did. 20 years goes by, and everybody lives their own lives. They have children. They get married, and life goes on. Now, they're thinking about all this. They're sitting, I guess, say, probably in an anteroom or somewhere there on a bench, and they're trying to think this through, and they say, oh, well, Hashem. It's not that we're innocent. It's not that we just call a Bezdin and say, all right, we condemn him now to an absolutely uncertain fate because he's a nudnik. We say, yeah. He's guiltless. This man here, we don't know what's driving him, but we do know what's driving us. We do know what brought us into this situation, and that is that they 20 years ago, a couple of decades ago, sold their brother, the Yishmael, and a fate completely unknown. Now, Rav Hirsch gives us insight into this statement of Vav Hashemim. He says that conscience, the human conscience, is such that even after years, it lies dormant within them. But nevertheless, when they're confronted, it flares up. And all of a sudden takes on a life of its own. So thus says Rav Hirsch, that you can only keep conscience down so long, and then flares. Now they realize what they have done and what they have been. And I think that's a very, very beautiful insight on Rav Hirsch's part. And how we could explain, something, you think you've suppressed it. Many times we think we've suppressed feelings, good or bad. And by the way, about events, good or bad, that we've done. And then all of a sudden, if we feel guilty, it flares up. And it literally tries the soul and the conscience. Now, Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitch, on this very phrase, has a beautiful piece that I'd like to read to you. And it is not uncommon for Rabbi Yoshe Ber to draw a bridge between what happened to the Avot, again, Maaseh Avot Siman Banim, that the deeds or what occurred to the fathers have in application, powerful application to the banim, to us. Let us read for a moment what he said. The brothers, when they say aval ashimim anachnu, until now we've not admitted to or confessed our sin. Until now, the voice of our pleading brother didn't shrill in our ears, nor trouble our conscience. Until now. Until now, we did our very best to repress and ignore the feeling of guilt which gnawed away at us. We did not want to admit our guilt. We did not dare to give voice to these thoughts. Now we see that the sin surfaces and confronts us. We see that providence avenges itself upon us, that Shimon is in jail, that the viceroy conspires against us, though we are completely innocent in this regard. We're completely innocent, accusing us of the preposterous crime and sin of being spied. It is not obvious that we are called upon to answer for the blood. Is it not obvious that we are called upon to answer the blood of our brother, whose pleas still reverberate and assail our ears? This must be a punishment from heaven. Not happenstance, as Abravanel said, they were thinking until now. Now they know that it's part of hashgacha. Our denial of sin will no longer. Sin confronts us in all of its dread. There is no escape. Come, brother, let us confess. Indeed, aval bekushta. Then Rabbi Yashaber then actually tells us that about our wrongdoing. One second. And he likens it to our admission on Yom Kippur. Like the admission of guilt by the sons of Jacob, heads of the tribes of Israel, so is the confession that we recite repeatedly on Yom Kippur. We are not so insolent and obstinate as to say before thee, God, our Lord, righteous are we, and we have not sinned. But we are dealing with confession. Why do we suddenly begin extolling ourselves? We are not so insolent and obstinate. Why is this self-praise in the midst of our confession? In fact, the passage does not praise. Instead, it emphasizes our guilt. Because what was done by what we do on a yearly basis is what the brothers did for the years between the sale of Yosef and the accusation of espionage leveled against them by Yosef. And so Rabbi Yashaber very often, I don't know about very often, but often enough, ties the words of the Avot and the events of the Avot into our daily lives. If you recall on the words about Yosef when he was confronted by Potiphar's wife, and he said, and the Torah tells us, Vayoma'in, he refused her advances, period. Stop. He refused her advances. And then later, if she wants an explanation, I'll give her. The first thing you have to do is refuse. Enticement must be refused. That was what Yashaber said then. He said, and that has become, as he said, a trait of the Jewish people. The trait of the Jewish people is to refuse when, as a nation, we are asked to engage in behavior that is counter to our destiny and our purpose. Now, we're going to also see next week when we review the entire magnificent story of Yosef and his brothers, where we see Yehuda and the word Eravon, the word Yehuda, he gives a security to Tamar. And that Eravon appears and reappears over and over again. In the next week's parsha, he says, Ani ervenu, I will guarantee Binyamin, let's take him back. That otherwise we're not going to survive. And then in the next parsha, at the in Vayigash, what do we see? In Vayigash, the stirring plea of Yehuda, he says, Avdecha Ravetanar. Again, Eravon, your servant, meaning he himself, has guaranteed to my father that Binyamin will return. Eravon. Vayeshev, Miketz, Vayigash. We'll touch on that next week too. I would submit to you that just as the word Vayuma'ain has become a trait, part of the functioning fiber of the Jewish people, so it is with Eravon. And that Kol Yisrael Haravim Zebazeh is probably one of the most, if not the most essential national element of our existence. And it's understood by Jews everywhere, wherever they are. A sense of responsibility and intertwined responsibility from one Jew to another. That's Eravon. Kol Yisrael Haravim Zebazeh. And that even Jews who are very far religiously away, they have a sense, particularly in Eretz Israel, soldiers have a sense that they're going to save a Jew. They're not going to ask whether he puts on tefillin or he doesn't put on tefillin. He's a Jew. She's a Jew. And therefore, we have a responsibility to it. So that's part of the character fabric of the Jewish people. Just as surely as refusal is, when it comes to asking us to do things that are wrong, so Kol Yisrael Haravim Zebazeh is a part of our national character when it comes to the Jewish people. And so here we see the story comes, of course, will continue for a while until the middle of Parshat Vayigash. I want to add one thing. I have a friend, Dr. Howard Wine, Dr. Howie Pilot, was lived in Indiana for a long time, in Aliyah. Children live in Eretz Israel. They live in Eretz Israel now. And he said, when you look at things, the Ala Parsha Bereshit, you find some very interesting things. What do you find? You find that so many people think they understand and they don't understand. Paro thought that Sarah was not married. She was. And then you have Yitzchak thought that Yaakov was Esau. He wasn't. Yaakov thought that the blood of the coat was Yosef's blood. It wasn't. And we find, and Rachel, Yaakov thought Rachel, that Leah was really Rachel. She wasn't. And he shows in many, many different instances how people think that reality is one way, but it's really another. What is the purpose behind that? He mentioned, and I think he's quite right, we think as human beings that we understand the world. We don't. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands the world. And so therefore, all of these incidents, whether it's Paro or Rachel or Yaakov or any, and there are other examples, of course, as well in Bereshit. But the idea of here is to tell us, think you understand, but you don't. Only God understands. Okay, everyone. Hopefully, we will meet again next week, and where we will talk about Parshat Vayigash. I hope everybody has a Chanukah Sameach, and I hope all is well with everyone.